long ago in a galaxy far, far away, or what seems like long, long ago to me, it was 20 years ago in 1992, and what seemed like a galaxy far, far away in Eastern Europe. I was living in Hungary, and it really was a whole different world that I had never been introduced to, and I discovered all kinds of new, incredible things about myself and about the world and about government and about education. But I want to tell you one thing that's really interesting about my time in Hungary. I'm there and I'm trying to learn the language, and it's tough. I don't know if you've ever tried to learn Hungarian, but it's really tough. There's all kinds of sounds I'd never made in my life that I was supposed to be proficient in. And I mean, just the subtle nuances of the sounds was beyond my ability to even hear. So I'm struggling along trying to speak Hungarian to these people. Now, of course, this is 92. So the wall has just fallen, I mean, very, very recently. And the Hungarians are incredible people. There was the uprising in '56. I mean, they are dynamos. And they were largely responsible for the wall falling in the first place. And so they embraced the West, right? Like by the time I was there was already McDonald's and Wendy's and all kinds of cool stuff. And in fact, I just have to say this, I didn't plan to, but the most beautiful restaurant I've ever been to in my life was in Budapest. It was McDonald's. It was unbelievably gorgeous, 3-story ceilings with chandeliers and gorgeous tables because it was so expensive to them. And you went up and there was the same little cup with the same little menu, and you would order your little hamburger, you know? Anyway, so funny. So I'm learning this language, and I meet lots of people. I lived in different places throughout the country, and this conversation that I'm about to tell you about happened multiple times in different cities. So I know that it wasn't just one specific individual or one specific area that felt this way. Everyone felt this way. If you know anything about Hungary, it's this little tiny place. It's like half the size of Utah, and it's kind of snuggled in there between Austria and Romania is below it, and Russia's to the side. And they were under Russian rule for 40 years before that wall fell. And the conversation I would have with people would go something like this. They would be really impressed that I was learning Hungarian. They'd say, "Oh, I can't believe you're learning our language. That's so awesome." And I would say, "Yes." And they would say, "Do you think it's a pretty language?" I thought that was kind of odd. "Well, sure. I can't believe how many people ask me this question. Do you think it's a beautiful language?" I would say, "Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. Absolutely." And they would say, "Yeah, it's not like Russian. Russian is so ugly." Yeah. Then they would go on with, "And you know what? The Russians forced us to learn Russian in school, and I don't speak a word." Happened so many times. They were so proud of the fact that they had blocked that out. Now, if they had to speak Russian to save their lives, I'm sure they could have come up with something. I mean, obviously they passed their tests, they graduated and that kind of thing. But they hated that they were forced. And this was their own little personal rebellion. It was one way in which the Hungarians could unite against the Russian forces and not learn that ugly Russian language. Now you fast forward 20 years, and almost 20 years, and I find out about Oak. And we have these series of meetings, and it's fantastic. And he wants to start this organization called Agency-Based Education based on a book that I absolutely love called Teach the Children that I had read years before that opened my eyes to all kinds of cool stuff by Flinders. And we keep having these conversations about we need foundational ideas. We need, we kept asking the question, are we for homeschoolers? Are we for public schoolers? Are we for private schoolers? What are we about? And what's the place where everyone could meet? And we knew that place that we could meet was at the principals. And so we hashed those out, and we talked and had several sessions of what should those principles be, and tried to put words to them and brainstormed. And we came up, if you look in your booklet, I've got a list there of the agency-based educational principles. Now, the very first one says, must be based in choice and not compulsion. Well, the Russians broke the first rule. They forced, and they forced for years. You had to learn Russian and speak their language. It's not that it's important to honor agency. It's that it's the only way you can even win. You can force people to learn Russian, and they'll still never speak it. You can force people to learn all kinds of things, and based on, you're going to beat them with a stick, or you're going to expel them, or whatever it is you're going to do to them, they'll choose to learn whatever you tell them to learn, but they won't retain it, and it won't mean anything to them. It's kind of like when I started, my first clue into that I might want to look into some alternative educational plans was when my oldest was like 4 or 5, and I was like, okay, he's coming up on school. I got to think about this. What are we going to do? And I got this report. I just don't remember how I got it. And it was all this data about standardized testing in my school district. And what it said was that one high school in my entire school district had scored above 50% on standardized testing the previous year. And I thought, okay, I don't even think the standardized tests are really hard. So if most of the schools in my school district can't score above 50% on that thing average, maybe I ought to look at something else. One of the things that Mr. Osmond was talking about is trying to work in a system that has all these layers of assumption. And that's sticky to wade through, because you've got all kinds of assumptions about what human beings are and what they should know. And that system highlights 2 or 3 intelligences above all others. It says that everyone should conform to some kind of prototype. And it's tough to wade yourself through that system. So of course, anything we can do to bring increased agency to any system is going to be best for everyone, because force just doesn't work. Whether you like it or not, I saw that list of those schools, and I thought, I got to look at something else. And I thought, well, okay, I'm not an expert. I better just send them to private school, because, I'm not an educator, and I was still in that authoritarian model and that kind of stuff. And so years go by, and we bring him home, and let's try this homeschool thing, and we try that. And it's like I'd never gone to school. I don't know if any of you have had that experience. But I'm picking up, like the basic stuff from the children's section on like Greece or American history, and I know nothing. And I got good grades, I went to good college, all this kind of stuff, and I'm thinking, how did I pass a test on this information year after year after year? And I don't even remember it. And I just, what Mr. Stoddard was talking about with this Great Brain Project just resonates with me, because I just think, yeah, choice, excitement, initiative, that they're going to remember. This little girl is never, ever going to forget most of what she learned about hummingbirds, because it was internally motivated. So we want to talk about principles. We've got to be founded in principles. And it's not just educationally, it's in every area. My husband and I have had all kinds of trouble in our marriage. We've had trouble with our health. We've had trouble in our finances. We've had trouble with our parenting. And at the Ten Boom Institute, we say, building character through the classics. And the foundational mission statement is about building noble character through identifying and applying principles, because what we've discovered is that principles heal in every area of life. And as you identify and apply them, you reap the rewards, those natural laws that exist because we're human beings, and they govern our lives. And Cecil B. DeMille said we can't break the laws. We can only break ourselves against the laws. So what's a principle? Let me give you a dictionary definition. A fundamental, primary, or general law or truth from which others are derived. Okay? What this means is that a principle is an idea. It is not an action. And I want that distinction to be clear. When you have a problem and you go to your neighbor and you say, I'm having this problem, and they tell you some behavior you should engage in, they're telling you something that you should do, they're giving you an application. That application they believe in because they had results by it, or because they believe it's actually an application of some kind of principle that they also believe in. But it's governed by their belief system, whatever that belief system is. Let me tell you what Covey said. Principles are self-evident. Principles apply at all times in all places. Principles, unlike values, are objective and external. They operate in obedience to natural laws regardless of conditions. So Alexa, he's over in France. It's 1830. He's an aristocrat. He's learning about stuff. He's getting a fabulous liberal education, and he decides, I'm going to go see what they're doing in America. Because I keep hearing about this democracy idea where all people are created equal. You know, of course, since the 1500s or so, you know, this idea of democracy has been building and building. I mean, I guess it goes back to Magna Carta even in the English tradition. And it's just building and building and building. And he's like, man, those Americans are doing it. Like, okay, we have slaves. So we're not really doing it, but we're doing it with a certain class, kind of like the Greeks did it with a class. So he says, I'm going to go study their penal system. I'm going to go find out what they do with people who break the law. But really what he did was come over and find out what Americans were really like and what democracy in America meant, how Americans were building a civilization based on the idea that men were equal versus the idea in France that some were higher and some were lower, an aristocratic model, right? Like that's the contrast. And he really believes, he says in his book over and over again, that it's providential, that God says that men are equal, and that we need to apply that principle. So he writes Democracy in America, and he writes it in French to the French. He really wants, especially the French aristocrats, to begin to get their minds around, I mean, for good or ill, it's coming. Now, French history is, you know, plays out that absolutely it was coming, and there was all kinds of damage that went on because it was coming. So he's writing this book, and the introduction, he says, let us look to America. Let us borrow from her the principles rather than the details of her laws. He got it. America is founded on some principles. There's an American way to be free. There's an American way to have a Republican democracy, and there's a French way to do it. It doesn't have to, you know, there's a certain way to educate at your house, and there's a certain way to educate at my house. And we don't have to do it the same way. I have a dear friend who, for several years, I had to keep reminding her that homeschooling is not a true principle. That parents are in charge of the education of their children is a true principle. But she was just determined that everybody under the sun needed to homeschool. And that's just not true. It's just not going to work for everybody all the time. It's just not a true principle. And we're not necessarily doing other people a favor by telling them that their house needs to look like our house, their education needs to look like our education, because it just can't. They're different and we're different, and the applications are going to look very different. But the principles are always the place. The natural laws are always the place. That's why we can gather agency-based education, and we can have conversations based on principles. And this organization has laid out principles for you so that you can identify with those. And they resonate with you, and you say, yes, we're going to do that. We're going to get in line with those principles, and then we're going to figure out how to bring our neighbors and our local schools and our state or whatever it is we're working on, wherever our place of service is, in better line with those principles. And we can argue from a place of principles, and we can build bridges, especially, most importantly, even for those who are going to reject a God foundation. This was probably the most valuable insight of my entire liberal arts education, was to recognize that natural laws are the bridge builders. That's where you can communicate effectively with other people. You can show them natural consequences for certain laws, and you can become unified, and then you can speak to the applications once you're unified on principles. We've got a couple problems. One problem is that we don't think this way most of the time. And part of the reason that is the case is because we weren't educated to think this way. 200 years ago in this nation, principle was a very common word. Natural law was a very common word, common term. It's right there in our declaration because it talked about it all the time. It was a very common binding concept for all of Americans, and it was something that went on in the schools. It was a concept that was taught in the schools, and so people had a better idea how to unite on principles. So it's elusive to us because we're not really familiar with what they are, and we're going to go over that in just a minute, and how to identify them and how to live by them. Now, the second problem is that there are false principles. If a principle is just a foundational idea upon which you base your behavior, well, then you could have a false principle. So let me give you a few examples. Aristotle said that it was just a principle, it was just a law of nature, that there has to be a slave class. There has to be a subservient class in any society so that there can be a leisure class. Because that leisure class needs to get a certain kind of education so that they can lead in the society. And in order for that to happen, there has to be a slave class. And he also, of course, based on those fundamental principles that he taught and wrote about, did not believe that all men were created equal. Well, we live in a society where it bears out every day that you can actually have more people with more leisure if you base it on a principle of democracy rather than aristocracy. We know democracy is more of a true principle than aristocracy. He didn't know that. And therefore, lots of things were learned and taught and perpetuated in societies for a long, long time after Aristotle because of that false principle that was taught. This is a very extreme example. Hitler believed that there was an elite class. Obviously not a true principle. And he said very often, just elite, just rise up, just show yourselves, just prove who you are, and then you'll lead, and we'll lead on, and we'll create, and he was happy to exterminate those that weren't elite. Feminist movement. They were based on some false premises. They were based on some true premises too, and that's where it got confusing. And that's where a lot of the argument went on. One of the things that they went too far with is that they ignored, sometimes even demonized, the natural law of motherhood. Most women, most of the time, at some point, want to experience motherhood. It's just true. And to ignore that and even to demonize what lies in the heart of a human being because they're just a human being can wreak havoc. There's a fabulous book called What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us where Crittenden just goes on and on about, you had a whole generation of women who bought into the feminist movement and they followed the career and they did the whole thing and then they were 35 and they were like, wait a minute, I didn't make family a priority and now I've got 50 more years on the planet and I don't look as cute as I used to and I am not as thin as I used to be and I got to catch a guy and we got to have a baby because I've got to experience that. They felt cheated because they were taught false principles. Now, my neighbor came to my house one day, and she said, she knocked on the door, and I let her in. She was nice. Our kids play together sometimes. She said, Audrey, I need to talk to you. I said, okay, let's talk. So she sat down on my couch. She said, I'm just really concerned about your kids. I said, okay. And I was able to not be offended. I had been beaten up by family for 10 years by this point, so I was all good to go. Anyway, and I knew what part of her heart it came from, so I could appreciate where she's coming from. I'm really worried about your kids. Why are you worried about my kids? Well, because here's the thing, Audrey. Homeschool doesn't prepare people for the real world. Public school is what prepares people for the real world. Because, look, my husband is smarter than his boss. It's just, we know that, it's just a fact. But he has to do whatever his boss says. And public school prepares people to be able to do that the rest of their lives. To be able to answer to people that are dumber than them and less educated than them or whatever. I mean, he knows he has better skills than this guy and whatever it is. And I just think, your children are getting the idea that they can do whatever they want and they can choose to learn what they want to learn and they can choose, and it's just damage. And she was so nice and she was so genuine. And I was like, really going to be okay. We're totally good. I promise it's, and it's going to be okay. And it's so fascinating because she left and I was like, just trying to be on the owner track. I'd like my kids to not always have a job, but anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. So you're in a situation and you've got a child and you want to think about their education. So you go to your neighbors and you say, what should I do? And you're going to have the public school advocate. I promise. I've known several of them. They just know that public school is the right way to prepare people for the real world, and they're going to tell you, you know, that you have got to take the public school track, and you're going to have other private school advocates who are going to be like, do you know what? The founders paid for their educations out of their pockets, and government should not be in charge, and you need to choose it, and you need to create competition among schools. And then you're going to have, you know, the homeschool advocates like my friend that are just like, no, it's the parents' responsibility to educate the child, and that's the only way it can be a one-on-one, you know, type of situation. So really, by the time you're done asking your neighbors what you ought to do, you're right back to square one. You did not have a principle-based discussion. What you heard was a bunch of applications and opinions. And this is going to happen to you all your life. In many, many realms, it's going to happen to your children. It's going to happen to your grandchildren. It's going to happen to your students. They're going to hear. We're inundated with information. This is the knowledge age, right? And there is too much to know. And so people are going to give you their opinions all day long, and you are the one that has a responsibility to be discerning if you want the fruits in your life that only principles can bring. So then, okay, you're right back where you started. So then you go back to these people, well, okay, you know, and then they're going to spend all their time telling you about the right application. If you decide to homeschool, they're going to tell you, oh, you've got to do TJ Ed. That's just the only way to homeschool. Or it's Charlotte Mason. She just rocks. That's just, you know, it's Waldorf, it's Montessori, it's whatever it is, you know. Or, you know, the public schoolers are going to tell you you've got to choose this certain school, this certain teacher, or the private school advocates are going to tell you which private school is the best. And so you're no closer to deciding what you're going to do with your child. Jack Barzun said, the only thing worth teaching anybody is a principle. Because that's all that they can really take home and do anything with. You know, everything else is just what you happen to apply, what your specific opinion is. You know, should there be Homeland Security? Shouldn't there be Homeland Security? Well, let's have a conversation about the principles, because until we do, I don't know. That's just your opinion or my opinion based on other fundamental ideas that you have. So in that packet, let's go through this characteristic or nature of principles. I finished out this list, and I've been on this path about principles for so long that now I'm to 11, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, I've really got to cap it out at 12, but I can't think of a 12th one yet, so maybe someday I will. These are some characteristics. So you're going along, and I don't have time to go into, you know, how to find principles as you read certain things, how to identify them, that kind of thing. We do have a video blog, and we do have the How to Read video trainings are coming out. We're about to release the first one, How to Mark a Book. It's based on a study skills course that I've done a zillion times. And so one of those will be How to Read for Principles. And if you want to get on there and get on our email list at 10 Boom Institute, we'll let you know when it's ready. And that will be some practical how to do it yourself, how to do it with students, that kind of thing. But for now, we can at least go through some of the characteristics. So when you're talking to a friend, or you're looking at legislation, or you're reading a book, or you're trying to fix something that's going wrong with your children, you can look at this list and say, does it match? Does it look to me like it's a principle because it matches these characteristics? So it's a foundational idea. We touched on that. True for all people all the time, because we're human beings. The whole idea of natural law says, whether you believe that God put it into our nature, which I do, or you believe that it's just ingrown, which I'm not even going to get into that discussion because whatever. I don't think it works. But anyway, it's true for all people all the time. That means that exercise and lots of fruits and vegetables and grains is going to make me healthier, and it's going to make an ancient Egyptian healthier. Not culture specific. It's not time specific. It's just going to be true no matter where you are, no matter who you are, because you're a human being, and these are laws that govern human beings. C.S. Lewis, the very best primer ever on natural law, I think, is go grab Mere Christianity and read book 1. It is the most brilliant exercise in explaining the foundational concept of natural law and how it ties into conscience and all that kind of stuff of anything I've ever read. And he just talks about how whether people want to admit it or not, they have a governing value system. That's why they get ticked off when you take their seat on the bus. They expect you to know. He says, we shouldn't even, We could have been upset with Hitler and had to fight him, but there was no reason to blame him unless we thought there was a natural law that he should have known better. Regardless of where he grew up, regardless of who his mom was, regardless of whether or not he had Common Core, he should have known certain things about human nature, and he should have known he was doing bad stuff. Because we believe in natural law whether we admit it or not. So it's true for everybody all the time. Another great one at the back of Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, he's got an appendix that is his attempt to identify a handful of natural laws, and he gives you a handful of quotes from all different cultures and says, see, everybody's believed this. It's just been, there's never been a society where they put a statue up in the center of town of you because you were the best thief around. That society just doesn't exist because it's a natural law to, to honor personal property. Okay, the third one, creates greater freedom. Now, if you haven't seen this video, I don't know how to get you to it, but you should really go search it on YouTube. There's this video that's come up recently of this guy. He goes into a bank for a loan. Have you guys seen this one? So good. So he goes into this bank for a loan, and the loan officer's like, so, okay. He's looking at the guy's paper, and he's like, so you borrow more than you make every year then? Oh yeah, absolutely. That's just, that's how we roll. It's just what we do. And the guy's like, I can't up your debt ratio. I just can't let you borrow more money. And he's like, why not? And they have this big conversation. They go back, of course, it's mocking the government. They go back and forth, and they're having this big row about why in the world he can't borrow more money because his numbers don't work out, and he wants to debt more, but he doesn't have the income to ever pay it off ever. And so then the last scene in the video is his 6-year-old daughter signing off on his loan. Because she can pay it off eventually. Now, this is the concept that natural laws create greater freedom, and not obeying laws decreases freedom. The principle of staying out of debt, of living within your means, is just a principle no matter where you live. It's just math. It's just kind of basic elementary school math. And you really ought to live it. And because human beings, government isn't some kind of entity that's above the human realm. It's human beings governing other human beings, and therefore it applies as well. So as we watch our economy, our production levels going down and the dollar devaluating more and more quickly, we're breaching natural laws, and we're decreasing our level of freedom, and that's all very clear and obvious to most of us. Okay, it will expand your mind. George Orwell said, the best books are the books that teach you what you already know. I thought that was fantastic. It's kind of like maybe we already knew this stuff, or somehow it just resonates with something that's internal. But true principles expand your mind. A light goes on. You make all kinds of new connections you've never made before. You feel kind of smarter or enlightened or awake somehow. Now, the difference here between number 4 and number 5, number 4, it's expanding your mind. It's making you be able to think in new ways. And with number 5, it enlightens your understanding. It goes to your heart. It feels true. So this is a mind and a heart connection. That principle will be able to work out logically in your mind, and it'll feel true to your experience. It will enlarge your soul. It creates greater depth. The fact that I understand the concept of natural law and then studying all these worldviews and different cultures and things has made me a more empathic person. As I've struggled to try to gain better understanding, as I've worked toward a better education for myself and reading all of the religious books of all the cultures and those kinds of things, I have greater depth. There's more to me. There's greater capacity. I have an expansion of my soul. It is empowering. Lots of us will despair that, this isn't going to work, or that isn't going to work, or our country is doomed, or your child's never going to, be nice to you, or whatever it is. And the discovery of a true principle will bring new hope. You'll think, oh, that's what I wasn't getting. That's what I wasn't doing. And now you have some key, something you can do about it, and you will feel empowered. It will increase your desire for good. The application of a principle will spur the desire to live more principles. It's proven, statistically proven, that people that exercise tend to eat healthier. Parents that are involved in their children's education raise more responsible adults. And they're cross. There's greater desire for good in all areas. Not just, if you live a principle in this area, you want to live it more, but there's that kind of spiral upward as well. Generates growth and enlivens. You feel more alive, you feel awake, you feel excited about life again. Some of those feelings of depression and despair go away as you have personal growth. You can look back a year from now and say, I'm really a better person. I really like myself better. I like my life better. And that's because in the simple way that Christ taught this was just by their fruits you'll know them. Those that live principles have the fruits. And they don't have the fruits right now like they won the lottery so they got a big house. They have the fruits over a lifetime. The ancient definition of happiness, I don't have time to get into all of this, but the ancient definition of happiness is different than our definition. And the ancient definition of happiness said, you can't show that a man was happy till he's dead. Because a happy life is one where principles were lived for a lifetime. It increases health and wholeness. So everything in your life, if you lose a bunch of weight, you don't just run faster. There's all kinds of things in your life that are improved. My husband and I began to live financial principles, and our marriage improved. Principles create health and wholeness in multiple areas. As you embrace true educational principles more and more in your life, you'll find out that they're also parenting principles. You'll find out that they're also spiritual principles. And you'll find out that there's a lot of ways for you to live these principles that agency-based education promotes. Last one, win-win. When you live a principle, there might be a short-term cost for someone or even a short-term cost for you as you repair damage that you've done or those kinds of things, but ultimately there's growth in you and growth in the other individual or growth in your organization and another organization. Principles promote win-win type environments. Okay. Let's go back then for just a second and look at, how much time do I have? Okay. So I'm going to get through page 8 of 16, just so you know. Let's go back to the example that I gave of all my friends who are telling me how to educate my child. And let's look at this list of agency-based education. Do you think that my friends and I could meet on these principles? I think we could all agree that parents are in charge of the education of their child, that education should be about the pursuit of truth, that it should make the individual a better person, that the child or youth or adult should have some say in what their education is. They should have some agency to participate in their own education. So that's where we can meet. Now, I want to mention one last, couple little last points I want to make. Our founders got it. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I want to cite another example. Our Declaration of Independence. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. It goes through natural law and all this kind of thing, and then it says, we can alter, we have the right, government comes from the people, which is really a revolutionary idea. Government comes from the people, and that means that they can alter it or even abolish it if it's too subversive of their rights. And then it says, when and if the people do decide that they should abolish their government, they will institute, and I'm quoting now, institute new government laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form. The application, your homeschool, your private school, whatever it is, that's your form you've chosen. But the principles should always be the same. Just like with Tocqueville, we can be French and live the principles, and the Americans can be Americans and live the principles too. And just by the way, one of the most incredible things that I learned in Teach the Children by Flinders, when he talks about what the authority figure is in each age level child, so brilliant. It's one of my very favorite things. He talks about how 0 to 8, the authority is parents. 8 to 12, the authority is rules. And 12 and older, when they become abstract thinkers, you know what the authority is? principles. That means if they see hypocrisy, they're looking for guiding ideas. They know that you can't tell them what to do the rest of your life, nor do they want you to. They need something to guide them. And if they see that you've been teaching this set of principles, and they come to believe that they're false because they see hypocrisy, they will rebel. It's one of the #1 reasons why youth rebel in the first place. And just understanding that they're looking for core principles to embrace, here's what causes anyone to embrace a principle. It's evidence. You obtain evidence, and these are some of the checkpoints here that I've given you. You obtain evidence in many ways. You obtain evidence through what we might call spiritual experience or inner experience. You obtain evidence through study and the experiences of others. You obtain evidence by watching the results, by the fruits. You see that certain people do certain things and they get certain results. You know, you do insanity, like I've been doing, and you're watching all these people and they're super thin and fit and you want to look like them, and there's evidence displayed before you all the time. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever done it, but Sean T was talking to this girl on insanity when I was doing it the other day, and he came over, she's wearing a sports bra, it's not very modest, so just so you know. She's wearing a sports bra and he says, "Oh yeah, you didn't used to wear one of these." He's giving evidence to her and to the audience. See, it works. See, I'm an expert. See, I'm helping you. See, we're living principles. We're exercising really hard. We're going to be thin and fit. And so you need to acquire evidence of every kind that you can. And the reason our mandate as parents and educators and legislators and whatever our role is in society, I think our role is to be the individuals who can identify the principles and to teach them to the next generation, because liberty is tied to principles. Where natural law is lived, freedom is always the result. Maximum level to obedience of natural law creates maximum freedom, and our founding generation was very obedient to a lot of natural laws, and they had a lot of freedom. And there's this cycle, which I talk about in the Principles of Liberty thing that's over there, the reading program. One of the lectures is about the cycle of the connection between the educational and governmental forms of lots of societies in history, because they go hand in hand and they spiral out of control together. So we want to perpetuate liberty, and we've got to do that by identifying principles and teaching them to our children, and helping them learn to identify principles and live by principles. And that's how we'll empower them to perpetuate liberty in the future, because those are so inseparably connected. These checkpoints are ways that you can say, I think I found a principle, it seems to match with the characteristics, here's my checkpoint. Does it look like it's a natural law? Would it apply it to everyone all the time? Does my scripture confirm it? Does my conscience and common sense confirm it? And does my experience and the experience of others confirm it? And there again, you're gathering evidence that creates faith in those principles. One of my very favorite readings is on that DVD set too. John Quincy Adams was living in Russia, and he wrote a set of letters to his 10-year-old son. He sent him back. He was trying to teach him how to read the Bible. And in one of those letters, he said this: "It is essential, my son, in order that you may go through this life with comfort to yourself and usefulness to your fellow creatures, that you should form and adopt certain rules or principles for the government of your own conduct and temper. Unless you have such rules and principles, there will be numberless occasions on which you will have no guide for your government but your passions." So, my challenge to you is to build up a generation of individuals who does not have to be governed by their passions, because they have a set of true principles that are their life guide. Thank you.